up on the website the TA hours so that you know when office hours are. So there are three primary rock types: igneous, sedimentary, metamorphic. Igneous rocks form from a liquid. So somewhere on Earth, the Earth must be able to melt. And so igneous rocks crystallize from a liquid. Sedimentary rocks are made up largely of particles of pre-existing rocks that have been transported and are deposited somewhere and then are hardened to form a rock. And then finally, metamorphic rocks develop when you take either igneous or sedimentary rocks and bury them to great depth, well outside the pressure and the temperature conditions under which those rocks originally formed. And at that point, we form new textures and new minerals, and we call those metamorphic rocks. We can relate these three very, very simple ideas of rocks to what's called the rock cycle. And I've just given you what is actually a very nice diagram describing the rock cycle right here. So as I mentioned, all igneous rocks start as melts from somewhere in the Earth's interior. And these melts are called magmas. Magmas then, because they're hot and very low density, migrate their way up to the surface, where we will get a volcano. Very, very typically, volcanoes form mountain ranges. They form high topography. Whenever you form high topography, you get weather. Clouds bank up against mountain ranges. We get rain, we get wind. Both of those agents serve to break down these rocks by a process that's called weathering. These weathered or broken down rocks are then transported either by wind or rain by a process called erosion. And so we transport these rocks some distance out downhill, more than likely. So the most way in which sediments are transported, these particles are transported, is by rivers and streams, out either into a lake or an ocean. When the water hits the standing water, the lake or the ocean, the particles being carried by these stream waters and river waters then fall down. They fall out to the bottom and accumulate here. And at this point, we call these sediment, because this is simply material which is sedimented out of water. It's just fallen out of water. However, this is a continuous process, and eventually you build up quite a thick pile of sediment. These piles can be as thick as kilometers in thickness, and all the pressure and the weight, basically, of the overlying sediments compacts the sediments down at the bottom of the pile. These sediments then undergo changes, including cementation and hardening, to form rock. And this process of taking sediment and transforming it to sedimentary rock is called lithification. For those of you who are up on Latin, lithe means turn to stone, very fundamentally. So lithification is the process of taking loose particles and cementing them together to form a rock, a sedimentary rock. Now, if we take these sedimentary rocks and continue to bury them, if we continue to bury them more and more under a much more increasing thickness of sediments on top, we increase the pressure by just simply the weight of the overlying material, and we're also going to increase the temperature. The deeper we bury things, the hotter things get. And in doing so, these rocks will undergo textural and mineralogical changes and be transformed into metamorphic rocks. And I don't think I need to explain why these are called metamorphic rocks. You've all heard of morphing, changing one thing into another, and that's exactly what metamorphosis means. You can also take an igneous rock and bury it to great depth and do the same thing, change the textures, change the minerals that are present, and convert an igneous rock into a metamorphic rock. Now, under some conditions, and I'll talk very briefly about that today because it's not actually all that common, you can take a metamorphic rock and bury it even further, and eventually bring it up to a temperature and a pressure where that rock will start to melt. And at that point, you then take this metamorphic rock and then produce a magma from it. And the cycle starts all over again. We then have a liquid rock, and this liquid rock then, because it's low density, very buoyant, rises up to the surface and crystallizes to form igneous rocks. So in a nutshell, that's why this is commonly called